Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, coming at you with another Coffee Conversations. I'm coming to you today from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. So wherever you happen to be listening from, pour yourself a cup of coffee or maybe a cup of tea or something like that, and join me for a little chat here. Let me know where you're listening from. That'd be cool. It's neat to hear you guys saying where we're sharing our coffee together. So wherever you happen to be, let me know. So we want to talk a little bit today about taking care of the small and boring stuff with our horse. This is something that came up in a conversation just the other day with my friend Colton Woods. He and I were chatting. He sent me a video clip of a rider riding a horse that was kind of stiff and bracy through the body, and tempo, of course, was influenced by that and that sort of thing. And he was helping coach her through softening the rib cage and softening the horse's mind, getting the horse to relax before moving on further. And her comment was, yeah, well, this is boring. And of course, he shared that video with me, and we had a little bit of a laugh about it. But it got me thinking, about how often people skip over what we think of as the small and boring stuff, and how important that really is to our horse. There was a quote I read by Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, depending on where in the world you happen to be. But his quote was, "Great things are done by a series of small things brought together." And that's really true, and I think about that with our horsemanship all the time. That is so true. Everything in your horsemanship, all of the big things, are really just a series of small things brought together. And it's really important for us to establish with our horse a foundation first of understanding and relaxation before we start focusing on a particular sport or a discipline. And it's that foundation of understanding and that foundation of relaxation that oftentimes I find people think seem to be the most boring, because in the training process, in the riding process, that involves a lot of waiting for the horse, waiting for the horse to make a decision, waiting for the horse to relax, waiting for the understanding to come through with the horse, maybe waiting for the horse to become more confident about what we're asking. There's a few things that I've learned that we can't rush when we're talking about the process with horses or with people. You can't rush confidence. You can't rush understanding. You can't rush relaxation. And I mean, really, I guess that goes more for more than just people and horses. That goes for anything, right? Any being, any individual we happen to be working with or engaging in any sort of communication with. You can't rush confidence, understanding, or relaxation. They have to develop on their own. You can help them, but you can't rush those things. Anytime you try to rush any of those things, all we sort of build up in the horse is tension, bracing, assumptions, anxiety, displaced behavior. We see that happen quite a bit. But it's funny when we talk about this foundation of relaxation and understanding. You hear riders say all the time, "Oh, it takes so long." Well, gosh, it takes a lot more time to fix than it does to get the horse mentally and emotionally engaged and steady in the first place. The waiting for the horse's understanding to come through, or for the relaxation to come through, that's nothing. Once you've got that part, man, you can carry on and work with that. But if you rush to begin with, it could take you years to fix that, or to take that rushing piece, or the brace, or the tension, or the assumptions that we created. It could take you years to get rid of those things, if you ever do. So, in the end, which one takes longer, right? Waiting for the horse to make a decision, to relax, to understand, to be more confident, or just rushing him through and creating a brace, creating a tension, creating assumptions, creating problems and behaviors that we'd rather not have, and then trying to fix those. Now, I think it takes longer to fix than it does to just hang out and wait. But gosh, it's so boring to hang out and wait, right? We see riders all the time, say, we'll use the example maybe of a rein back with a horse. I see riders all the time pick up on the reins, and the horse isn't quite ready yet. He hasn't got his body shaped up to perform the rein back or stepping backwards, and so they shift their seat around, they wiggle with their seat, they push with their feet, they might squeeze with their legs, they do things like that, and then they start pulling on the reins. All the while the horse is just trying to figure things out, so then he gets to slinging his head or stepping sideways or moving his haunches crooked, things like that, all because they didn't take the time to wait in the first place. I've got a big truck here coming past me, so I'll wait for it to pass before we go on. All right, truck's gone past. But anyway, we see that challenge with riders with the rein back. And that's just one instance, right? You could imagine all sorts of instances where riders get to pulling or pushing or kicking or whatever. And a lot of times, I think it's because either the rider just doesn't recognize, or because, and this is often the case, because they think this waiting around stuff is so bloody boring for them, right? Boring for the rider. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily boring for the horse, but boring for the rider, because they got a job they want to get done, right? They want to go jump, they want to go run, they want to go rope, they want to go ride down the trail, they want to, whatever it is they want to do. They get to rushing their horse, trying to force understanding or force acceptance. You can't do that. It just doesn't work that way. It's really important that we educate our horses to be solid riding horses before we try any sort of actual sport or discipline. He's got to be a solid riding horse before he's a dressage horse. He's got to be a solid riding horse before he's a jumping horse. Got to be a solid riding horse before he's a race horse or a rope horse or anything like that. Of course, you can play with the pieces of those things, but you've got to keep your horse's confidence and understanding and relaxation at the front of your mind when you're working with those pieces. It's like when I was riding with Ray Hunt. He had a pretty simple philosophy when we were starting young colts. Day 1, they cost you money. Day 2, they hold their own. Day 3, they're on the payroll. And what he literally meant by that is that by day 3 you could get a job done with them. By day 3, with those colts that we were starting, ride number 3, we were ponying other colts, we were starting to rope off of them, do little things like that. But that would never mean that the job that you had for them outweighed your responsibility to help those horses be relaxed, to be confident, to understand what you were doing. And we see that with riders a lot of times. As soon as we have a task in mind, something we want to get done, man, we forget about the horse we're sitting on or leading beside us. It's interesting. I did a clinic a few years back where it was a foundation class, and then we had an obstacle class in the afternoon. But we worked for the morning foundation class all about getting the horses soft and understanding and confident. And we worked some then in the afternoon with the obstacles, and I set up a little challenge for the riders. It was silly, really, the challenge. It was getting their horses on teams to push this giant soccer ball thing from one side of the arena to the other. And we set it up kind of like soccer, where one team was working to get the ball one direction of the arena, and one team was working to get the ball the opposite direction. And I'll tell you what, we spent a good half of that day working on the horse's confidence and relaxation, and working on picking up feet and putting them exactly where we wanted them to go, and working on helping the rider's aids become sophisticated. And as soon as they had that task of pushing that ball across the arena in mind, oh my gosh, all hell broke loose. It was a total shit show. They weren't thinking a bit about their horses. They got to rushing them around, running them through, shoving into each other, stuff like that. Horsemanship completely went out the window. And I will admit, I kind of set them up with that task in mind to challenge them, to see if that's exactly what would happen. And I kind of knew it would, because that's what happens a lot of times with riders, with people in general. We get a little piece of something, and then we kind of gloss over that when there's a job to do. It's really, really important to stick with that job. You can have a task in mind. I don't care what task it is. You can have a task in mind, but you can't throw the horse out the window in the process. In order for your horse to be, we call it a partnership, right? That's why we've got a whole word for it, horsemanship. If it wasn't that, well, it'd be a horse and a rider and a thing that needed done. But we call it horsemanship. We don't call it a horse and a rider and a thing that needs done. So important to think about that confidence on the horse's part, understanding on the horse's part, relaxation on the horse's part first. If you get that stuff taken care of, the rest of it's easy. The job is easy if you can get those things taken care of and keep them in the forefront of your mind. But gosh, we want to avoid the boring stuff, right? We all see it. You have friends that do. I know you don't avoid boring stuff, but you've got lots of friends probably that avoid the boring stuff. And there's a lot of issues that come up from doing it. You know, you think about just little things. When you avoid the boring stuff, you might have basic issues like struggling to bridle your horse because he maybe isn't softening into your hand when you ask him to yield his neck or move his head around or open his jaw. Maybe dragging behind you while you're leading him because you haven't taken the time to educate him about his hind feet stepping up when he feels kind of the slack come out of your lead rope. Even something as simple as resisting a leg aid because you just tried to kind of shove him from one place to another rather than helping him understand that your leg is a request for him to move. That's something I think that's pretty important to talk about. Your leg is a request for your horse to make a movement. Your leg is not up there to shove him across. You know, you can't shove your horse from point A to point B while you're sitting on him. He's the one with his feet on the ground, right? I mean, if you think about that, that's like me at this picnic table I'm sitting at right here, thinking I'm going to sit on top of the damn thing and shove it across the park. Like, none of us would make a stupid thought like that, right? I haven't mastered the power of levitation. Maybe some of your friends have, and they can carry their horse across the arena that way. I don't know. But, you know, it's mind-blowing to me how riders think they're going to shove or push their horse with their leg across from one side of the arena to the other. The horse has got to make a decision to move his body. He's got to get himself organized in that way. We can move his mind, but we can't necessarily move his feet. He's the one that's got to do that. He's the one that owns them. But those are just some basic issues that come from avoiding this so-called boring stuff. There can be a lot more dangerous things happen too. You know, if we avoid the boring stuff, you might end up with a horse that bolts in response to your aids. You could end up with some pretty serious trailer loading problems, right? Because maybe we got him on. You can get a horse on a trailer. There's a difference between teaching one to load on the trailer and getting one loaded onto the trailer, right? And maybe there might be a time where you just have to get him on the trailer. But gosh, I'd hope you'd keep him still in the forefront of your mind. There's an education process that goes into that, and it's well worth taking the time. You've seen some of your friends struggle with trailer loading because the time hasn't been taken to get the horse confident going onto the trailer and understanding that that's more important than anything else in that moment. I've seen horses when the basics have been skipped over, like we're talking about. I've seen them become pretty aggressive because they are just frustrated, right? Aggression out of frustration. It happens with, I think, everything that has a brain has potentially a propensity for aggression through frustration. You see people do it. You see your dogs do it sometimes. You see horses do it. I don't know. I'd imagine anything with a brain does. Because it doesn't know what else to do, right? The horse is the same way. And then we see more defensive behavior. And aggression, I suppose, would be a defensive behavior in that perspective, defensive out of frustration. But then you see other things like rearing and bucking. Those oftentimes are because we haven't taken care of those small, boring pieces, right? We've just glossed ahead, pointed them at a jump, or stuck them in the dressage arena, or point them in a barrel, or at a cow, or something like that. Again, I'm not saying you can't use those things to build a foundation in your horse, but when the task becomes more important, well, then you're just setting yourself up and your horse up even more. You're setting your horse up to fail. But we hear that all the time. I don't want to take the time to do that. I just want to go over the jump. I want to ride down the trail. I want to chase a cow. I want to run a barrel. I want to, whatever it is that riders want to do instead of taking care of the little tiny things. Like I said, you could build on those little tiny things. Your horse doesn't understand maybe an opening rein. Well, if he's got a cow to follow, your opening rein might help him. But you can't just take him to a cow and start yanking his face off, hoping that that's going to teach him about an opening rein, right? You want a horse to turn around maybe your inside leg. You can't run him at a barrel and bang on him with your leg to hope that that's going to teach him to move around your leg. But the barrel could give him a focus to help him understand, right? You think about getting a horse more forward. You point him to some jumps. But if he's not forward enough in understanding in the first place, your jumps are only going to create, at best, a runaway experience, right? Because he could certainly run away and get forward going over a jump if he's so inclined to go over the jump. If he's not inclined in the first place, you're just going to teach him to balk. You're going to teach him to resist the leg even more. I hope you guys can hear the crow that's yelling at me right now. He's got his eye on me pretty serious. I think he wants something that's under this picnic table. I don't know. Or maybe he wants a cup of coffee. He's going to join us for this coffee conversation. He can have mine. I just picked one up from a local drive-thru, and it's pretty awful. I hope your coffee's better than what I'm drinking right now. But, you know, it takes me back to that quote from Van Gogh. Great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Think about the big things that you want to do with your horse so that the small things can shape up and head in the right direction. That's pretty important. You know, I tell everybody, every time I climb on a young horse for the first ride, his first ride, I climb on him with the assumption that he's a Grand Prix horse, Grand Prix dressage horse, Grand Prix jumping horse. Maybe he's a world champion roping horse. The very first ride I climb on him, that's my assumption. And then I just kind of fill in the holes and the gaps along the way of what he doesn't understand. I'm not saying I'm rushing him to go make any of those performances. I'm saying in my mind, that's where we're headed. So I've got to fill in the gaps on the way. Think about those big things that you want at the end while you're working on those little things at the beginning so that those little things can shape up and head in the right direction. Think again about bridling, right? I want to make sure that my horse softens his head, softens his whole body really to the touch of my hand. If he doesn't, well, I've got a pretty good idea that he's gonna resist bridling. So when you reach out to pet your horse, what's his response? If he gets braced when you reach out to pet him, he's probably not going to automatically soften into the bridle whenever you present that, right? So think about how reaching out to touch your horse builds up to bridling him up softly, quietly, willingly. Think about things like your flying lead changes. If you've got to bang on your horse with your leg to get him to get him to move over, if you're thinking of it in that way, I promise you, your flying changes are going to be ugly at best. More chaotic, I suppose, would be more common. But if you think every time you touch your horse with your leg, if you wait for a mindful, soft response from your horse to a light leg aid, well, chances are you're shaping up for much better flying changes if you do that. Think about something like a sliding stop. If you're working on a sliding stop, but you've got to yank on your horse's face every time you want to make a downward transition, or you think you have to, right? That's really the case. We think we have to do these things. It's a good idea to help your horse understand a softness through your seat for even a downward transition. Imagine that. Imagine you ride your horse kind of until he's ready to slow down, he's ready to stop, and then you just get quieter with your seat. You present a feel to him that's softening through your seat. If he can understand that, then you're going to be more apt to get a sliding stop without thinking you have to pull on his face. We never really have to do those things. We just think we do because we haven't gotten our horse prepared. We haven't gotten these little things shaped up. If you can't get those little things shaped up, your big things are not going to come through. People say, yeah, well, when I offer this little bit, he resists, or I put my leg on him and he just stands there, or he steps into my leg, or he, kicks at my foot, or I pick up on the rein and he roots his nose, he pulls me out of the seat, he does all this stuff. A horse doesn't know anything about arguing until we teach him how to argue, right? A horse's natural inclination is to kind of move into pressure, so it's our job to help teach them to yield to pressure, but we have to take that time. You might pick up on that rein and he might push into it a little bit. You just wait. You hang out there. How long do you hang out? Until, right? How long do you let your children crawl around on the floor trying to walk, struggling to walk, before you say, nope, they're just not going to get it. We're just going to keep them crawling the rest of their life. But you see riders do that with their horses. They pick up on a rein, they want them to rein back. And the horse resists a little bit, so they drop the rein. They say, see, I told you he won't rein back. And so they've actually taught the horse to resist against that, to root their nose maybe, something like that, instead of softening and reining back in response to that brain pressure. Yeah, but he just wants to argue with me all the time. No matter what I ask him to do, he just wants to argue. He's just a jerk. You wouldn't even believe how many times I've heard that from your friends. I know none of you have ever said that, but you know, you've got some friends that say stuff like that. If a horse has learned how to resist against us, if he's learned how to, we'd say maybe argue, let him think he's arguing with a Buddhist monk, right? Just that might seem funny, but let him think you become a Buddhist monk. Imagine trying to argue with a Buddhist monk. They're not even going to partake in the argument, right? Just hang out and wait for your horse to come through with the right response. That's the waiting on the understanding part. Oftentimes it's the waiting on the relaxation part. Present a question to your horse and wait for him to come through with the right answer. And make it small to start with so that you can build up to larger things. I'm not saying climb on a colt for the first time and go present a flying lead change or tempi changes or sliding stops to him. That'd be foolish. There's a progression to everything we want the horse to understand, but we take it piece by piece. You ask a question of your horse, what's 2 plus 2, right? Well, we know what the answer is, but that doesn't mean the horse automatically knows what the answer is. We see it all the time. You ask the horse a question, I don't care what it is, but you're saying to your horse, what's 2 plus 2? And he comes through with an answer, -17. Well, I'm not going to change the question just because he got the answer wrong. And yet we see that happen all the time. I was working with a gal the other day. She picked up to ask her horse to go to the left, and her horse went to the right. So she dropped the left rein and bent him around to the right. Well, what did he learn by that? Picking up on a left rein means go to the right. Now, she just didn't understand. She was trying. She was actually doing a pretty good job. The horse was pretty quiet and had a somewhat of a basic understanding. He just wasn't sure of the rein aids and the leg aids yet. But she did a really good job of getting him prepared, so we just had to kind of get these things headed in the right direction a little bit. It only took about 5 minutes before she and the horse both made a nice big change. But think about that. You know, you pick up on a rein, say your left rein in this case, and your horse might go to the right. Well, don't release, because then you've told your horse that that was the right idea. Right? Your pressure motivates a horse to make a change, or should. You release tells him he did the right thing. Your release teaches, right? In this case, you pick up on that left rein, he goes to the right, you just hang in there. You know, you hang in there. If I pick up on a left rein and my horse goes right, I'm just going to wait until he yields left. Generally, that only takes a couple moments. Sometimes if a horse has learned to resist, it might take a little bit longer, but I'll wait. If I pick up on that left rein and he goes to the right, and suddenly the pit of hell opens up to my left, well, sorry, Charlie, we're going to hell, because he's got to go to the left, simply because I asked through that left rein. Now, that's not to say we can't make adjustments. If things get dangerous, if the horse gets really bothered, we can make little adjustments. But don't completely abandon the question just because he got the answer wrong. I ask, what's 2 plus 2? He says, -17. I say, what's 2 plus 2? He says, pineapple. What's 2 plus 2? Purple. Right? And I just keep asking. I say, what's 2 plus 2? And he says, 4? Then I release my rein. Then I let him know he did the right thing. Right? If you pick up and ask a question, hang in there and wait for your horse to think of the answer, to come up with the answer. It's so hard, though, because we think we have to do things all the time. We've got to be busy doing, right? It's not always about the idea of doing. Sometimes it's about shaping up and just waiting. A friend of mine years ago told me this little interesting line that I haven't forgotten yet. I hope I never do. He said, you know, we're called a human being, not a human doing. I thought that was pretty interesting. And of course, we were talking about something totally different, but that just popped into my head just now. You know, think about that when you're riding, right? Be there. The idea is not to get through the work that you're doing. The idea is to be part of the work that you're doing. The idea is not to get through the education with your horse. The idea is to be part of the education with your horse. Wait for the right answer. Wait for the understanding. Wait for the confidence. Wait for the relaxation. You can't rush those things. You can build on them, but you can't rush on them. Try to rush on them, I promise it's going to be ugly. It's going to be a mess. You'll be fixing those things for years, potentially, if you try to rush them. Anyway, so I hope you've had a good cup of coffee there. That's just some things to think about. Good cup of coffee or a good cup of tea. Like I said, my coffee kind of sucks today. So hopefully yours was good. I don't know. Yeah, so let me know your thoughts. Put them in the comments section here if you want to, if you're so inclined. Tell me how you take your coffee. Tell me where you're at, where we're visiting from through technology, sharing a cup of coffee together. This is a lot of fun. I think I'm going to keep up with these. You guys have been pretty supportive of this idea, so I think I'm going to keep up with this. All right. You go out there, gang. Keep that thought in mind. Work on the small stuff. Every time you touch your horse, every time you're around your horse, think about the small stuff. And think about the large things that those small things are shaping up to be. If you like them, keep going with them. If you don't like them, hang in there and change them a little bit. Get them on the right path. Your horse will thank you for it in the end, I promise. Because he'll be more confident. He'll have more understanding. He'll be more relaxed. And then everything will make more sense to him. Anyway, thanks for sharing your coffee with me, gang. Talk to you again later.